welcome into Cross My Heart Ministry. I'm Laura McFarland. I want to thank you for spending a little bit of your day with us. Well, as many of you know, we're teaching through the book of 2 Kings this semester. We did 1 Kings in the fall, 2 Kings this spring, and if you've missed any of those, just want to encourage you to click that playlist button below and go back and watch those studies. It has just been absolutely rich to see all the history and everything that happened there and sort of tie that in, even with some of the challenges that we see unfolding in our world today. Well, as a Bible teacher, as any Bible teacher will tell you, anytime you're teaching through a book that's a long book, there's a lot of details, a lot to cover, and in the study that we do, we may be covering 2, 3, 4 chapters a week. It's very challenging for me to decide which theme I'm going to develop for the teaching lecture, because we cover a lot of it in our day-to-day questions, but when it comes time for me to pray over and ask the Lord which storyline or which truth I'm going to drill down on, it's always difficult because there's always so much more that we could cover. So this week we're having our fellowship week, and so since the ladies are just sort of pushing pause, taking some time to share around the tables, have a little fellowship, talk and reflect and perhaps meditate upon all the things the Lord is teaching them, I decided this was the perfect time to sort of cycle back and develop one of those themes, because we want to post some teaching every Friday, whether or not we're teaching a full-fledged lecture on Wednesdays or not. So today I want to go back and revisit a character that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, and that is the young baby boy Joash, who became king at age 7, grew up and became the king of Judah, but he was crowned king at age 7. Now that's the story. You might remember his aunt Jehosheba rescued him. His evil grandmother, Athaliah, who had seized the kingdom of Judah, was killing all of his siblings. She was going to kill all of her grandchildren to ensure that her kingdom, her seizing of the throne of Judah, would not be threatened. It's just a tragic story. And this little baby boy is rescued because of the quick thinking and the courage of his aunt Jehosheba. Jehosheba is married to Jehoida the high priest, and Joash is hidden away in the temple until he's age 7 years old, and then he is crowned king. It's just an incredible story. It says this about Joash, that he did what was right. I'm reading in 2 Kings chapter 12, verse 2. Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all the years Jehoida, the priest, instructed him. So this little guy becomes king at age 7. He's crowned king, but Jehoida, the high priest, who had sort of served as a surrogate father for him, and Jehosheba, I'm sure, is a surrogate mother, mentored him and stood close by and watched and just mentored him. And when we look at Joash, he began very well. He followed the guidance and listened to the teaching of his sort of spiritual father, Jehoida, and he did some good things. He cleaned up the temple. He was mentored by this godly man. Repairs were made to the temple. There were a lot of good things that happened. 2 Kings 12:2 tells us that he did some good. He really did do some good. But we get over to 2 Chronicles, and when we study 2 Kings, sometimes the book of Chronicles gives us a little bit more information that isn't available there, and so we can fill in some missing pieces. And we go over to 2 Chronicles 24, and I'm sort of getting some information from verses 15 to 22. And in that passage, we learn that Jehoida eventually died at the ripe old age of 130. And what a faithful man he had been, not only as an advisor and a mentor to Joash, the king, the little boy, and later teenager, and then adult male, but he was revered by the people, because it tells us that when he was buried with the kings, even though he was the high priest. So he was revered, but things spiraled downward for Joash after the death of his mentor. He sort of rebels against God. He makes some very poor choices and some compromises. He abandons his faith, and idolatry comes back into the land of Judah. It's a very tragic story. He began well, and he ended really poorly. And so let me just read you what it says here in verses 20 to 22. after Joash had made all these poor choices, Zechariah, who is a prophet and the son of the high priest, he comes to Joash and he says this. I'm reading verses 20 to 22 in 2 Chronicles 24. Then the Spirit of God came upon Zechariah, the son of Jehoida the priest. He stood before the people and said, "This is what God says. Why do you disobey the Lord's commands? You will not prosper. Because you have forsaken the Lord, He has forsaken you." She has a bold message. This is a man who was raised by Jehoida. He knew the truth. And most likely it occurs to me that because Joash had been raised in the temple and had been raised and reared by Jehoida and Jehosheba, and this was their son, he probably had grown up with Zechariah. They had been children together, most likely. It says, but after he spoke this bold truth, here's what it says in verse 21. But they plotted against him, and by order of the king, they stoned him to death in the courtyard of the Lord's temple. King Joash did not remember the kindness Zechariah's father Jehoida had shown him, but killed his son, who said as he lay dying, "May the Lord see this and call you to account." So he ignores the warning. In fact, they decide to literally shoot the messenger, kill the messenger, stone the messenger. And he wants to silence that voice. He doesn't want to hear it. He is in full-blown rebellion against God. He's brought idolatry back in, and now he's committed murder. So things are spiraling downward very quickly for Joash. He's a man who began well and ended very, very, very poorly. It's just such a tragic end to such a very good beginning. So much potential. So much was given to him. Surely he knew the story about how his life had been spared, how he would have been dead had it not been for Jehosheba and Jehoida. He had been mentored. He had been trained up. He had been taught the truth, and yet abandons that as soon as his mentor is out of the picture. And ladies, I just want to tell you that as a Bible teacher, as a mentor, I've talked and cried with many women who have seen their adult children wander away from the faith. They have raised their children up. They have mentored them, taught them the truth of Scripture, had them in Sunday school and church, had family devotions, done so much right. And as soon as these adult children sort of get old or get out the door, leave the protection of home, and are no longer living under their parents' roof, they just sort of wander away from their faith as well. And I've talked to many women who take on no small degree of guilt over the choices that their adult children are making. They take on a lot of shame and self-degradation and play that shoulda, woulda, coulda game, asking themselves, what should I have done differently? Why didn't I do this? Oh, if only I could go back and start over again, how many choices I would make differently. But I just want to speak today to you if that's the place that you find yourself. If you are feeling some shame and guilt and just a heaviness, wondering why it happened, or knowing that you did some things wrong, knowing that if you could go back and start over, you would do things differently. But I just want to say to you, Jehoida the high priest did everything right, and Joash still wandered away. And you may be a woman who knows that there are some things that you could have done better or done differently, but you cannot judge your 20-year-old self or 30-year-old self by your 40 or 50-year-old self. You see, life is a classroom. We're learning as we go. It's sort of on-the-job training. And if God would somehow miraculously turn back the hands of time, you probably wouldn't do it any differently because you wouldn't know any better. You see, you're on a journey of learning and growing and being refined and sanctified, even as you're training up your children. And so be kind to yourself. If there are things you need to confess before the Lord, or even apologize to your children for, then by all means do that. But also check in with the Lord. If that's illegitimate guilt that the enemy is just heaping on you, then pray that the Lord would give you release from that you could sort of let that go. You know, as a young mom, I came across that verse over in Proverbs 22:6 that says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it." And I think as a young mom, I sort of took that as, well, that's a good bargain. God is making a deal with me. If I train them up right, they're never going to depart from God. I'll make sure, Lord, that they memorize all those key verses. I'll make sure they're in Awana and Sunday school. They'll be in church. I'll read the Bible to them every morning. And then here's a guarantee. They're never going to wander away from God. But you see, as I've gotten older, I've come to understand a little more deeply, and I think a little more correctly, what that verse means. Because what I really think Proverbs 22:6 means is that when we train them up and God's truth is in their heart and in their mind, they can't unknow what they know. They can't erase it from their minds. They can't unhear what they've heard. They can't unsee what they've seen. No matter how much they try to put their fingers in the ears and go, no, 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 no. It's there. God's truth is embedded. It's seared in their minds and in their hearts. And so sometimes it will just bubble up unwittingly, no matter how much they may want to silence that voice or get that out of their mind, it's there. And so as mothers of adult children, we can always pray that the Spirit of God will take the Word of God that's hidden in their hearts and minds and bring it forth and let them respond to it when they are ready. We no longer have them living under our roof. We no longer have the opportunity to train and mentor and put them where they need to be. But as adult parents, we can forgive ourselves for what we did wrong, seek the Lord's forgiveness if we need to confess anything, seek our children's forgiveness. But we don't need to take on that illegitimate guilt. It was a tragedy, what the choices that Joash made. And there are some children out there who were raised in wonderful Christian families, maybe your family, that are making some tragic choices as well. That's not necessarily your fault, Mom. So let that go where it needs to be let go. Continue to pray. And their story is still being written. As long as there's life, there's hope. And as you know from your life, and I know from my life, sometimes our mess becomes our message. Sometimes they have to wander away and test it, and maybe like the prodigal son, they'll be coming back. Our job, like that prodigal dad, is to stand at the door looking and expecting and watching and waiting and praying. We just lean into praying. No more browbeating, no more arguing. Just pray and ask God to take the truth that they know is there and bring it up, hedge them in, and bring them back. Because you, Mom, most likely raised those children to know the truth, just like Jehoida raised up Joash to know the truth. What happened to Joash is a tragedy. Every time I hear the name Joash going forward, I'm going to think of that passage as the Joashs Tragedy, to have so much potential, so much good that could have been done, and yet it was all squandered and all gone for naught. You know, sometimes we look at life and we say, well, here's the good and here's what happened from it, but really the better measure is to look at the potential of what could have happened and how that opportunity was squandered. And that's the sadness about Joash. That's his tragedy, that he had so much potential, so much opportunity, so much truth and wisdom poured into him as he was mentored by this godly man, and yet he came to a very bad end. He was eventually assassinated by two of his officials, and he was not buried with the kings. It's just a sad situation, but it doesn't have to be a sad end to our children. We'll keep praying, we'll keep hoping. If you have a child that's wandered away from the faith, please be encouraged to keep on praying and trusting that God in His timing will continue to draw them back. And you, Mom, can keep on praying. Well, for Cross My Heart Ministry, I'm Laurie McFarland. Thanks for spending this time with me today.